sometimes a favorite model won't even be the one that you really did do a nice build on. It might be the way the paint turned out, or just, you know, the approach that you took to it, or a specific subject, or something that you never realized. Okay, how's everybody doing? So I want to talk about something that's just a little bit different than the model railroad, and I'm doing this because it's one way that I can take a break, because I've been going, at least 2 years solid straight, and produced, well over 300 videos on just River Road alone. And I have no intention, just so you know, to the subscribers, of abandoning River Road. It's my ongoing legacy railroad project, meaning I'm into it for the long haul. But it is a model at the end of the day, just like everything else is. And for me to take a break is to build another subject matter and have some fun, like a break from scratch building, okay? And a kit is a really good way to do that, because it doesn't matter what subject that you do, any subsequent model will advance your skill set. If you're wondering how I did this, this is what I do with all my ship models and in the past. So this just pops off. So I do this before I glue the two hulls together. I just put a collar, like a piece of brass that slides over these. I glue them inside the hull. Okay, you can support it with the inner bracing that the kit comes with, and a bit of, you can use epoxy putty or a slab of plastic. And then I use 1/8 brass rod. So it basically just slides on, and then I can have a nice way to handle the model when I paint it. And it doesn't fall off. It's very light, so it fits with friction, because it goes up in quite a ways, up to the top deck anyway. And when I mount this, like when it's finished, I'll just slide this off when the painting's done, and then I'll have an identical hardwood block with the same spacing here and the same idea, and then I'll just slide the model onto it. That way, I mean, it's subjective how you want to display it, but I like a clean sort of look like that, okay? So that works for me, all right? Okay, so I just want to take a minute here just to talk to you a little bit about some paint theory that I use. Everybody has their own style and methodology and thinner that they like, and this is what I use, and I'm okay with it because I've been using this method for over 25 years, so I'm on a hobby level, and even on a pro level too, and I used to paint commercially. But anyway, so some people, or a lot of people, and I understand why they do this, like when they buy a bottle of Tamiya paint, right, like this, like, they're not the cheapest paints in the world, but let me just show you an example. So here's XF50 Field Blue, right? So, you know, you get your paint, right? You pay whatever, $4, $3.50. I don't know, in Canada, I think it's almost $5 or something. But I don't consider it expensive. I consider it an investment. So that's the way I look at it. And I'll show you how I add legs to Tamiya paint, which minimizes the cost when you're thinking about economy of scale. So when you first get a bottle of paint, you look at it and you go, wow, where's the paint? Look, it's only like half, like the pigment, like it's not even halfway. There's like a third or 25% before you, like you got to go way down to the bottom before you hit the pigment, right? Okay. And then it's only halfway, half of that is only the thinner that they use, which is a type of, it's a combination of many like ethanols, etc., which is why it's compatible with isopropyl alcohol. In this case, I use 99%. You can use 50%, 79, it doesn't matter. But the reason why I buy 99 is because I can thin this more. Like I get more for my money. This is already cheap compared to, you know, manufacturer's thinner, obviously. And I'm not going to get into why I do that or why I did in the past, but at the end of the day, it's for economy. And I have nothing wrong with using isopropyl alcohol through an airbrush as a suspender or solvent to atomize really good quality paint pigment. So when you get your little bottle, you're halfway, you think, what a ripoff, right? But this is what I do, because you can really give legs to me, because the pigment, I'll tell you right now, is superior to, well, it's not, I don't know that for sure, but I have no reason to change my paint choice with Tamiya, because it's one of the best, for sure. One of the best paint model hobbyist paint pigments on the market. So I take two, in this case, German grays. I took the thinner, I didn't shake it, and I just dumped it into this sort of empty bottle of black green, which I'll use for, you know, the boot, etc. But I'll talk about that later. So I dumped just the thinner into here. I haven't introduced any of this yet. And then I take the pigment out of here, and I dump most of it into this bottle. So now I just doubled up beyond factory. So this is now a lot of pigment in here, which I can make probably 6 bottles of this paint from all this pigment. 6, yes, that's right. That's the advantage of having an airbrush. People don't talk about that much, but you save a lot of money. So this one looks like it's empty, right? But there's pigment on the bottom, see that? Okay, so I'm going to put this away. Okay. You might want to put a tape on that, because it's, you know, that you've done that, just to mark it. And then I'll put this one away because I took the thinner out of it, and it's already really good for airbrush anyway. Even if I was to add another 50% thinner or 100% volume, I could still spray and cover with it. So now I've got this. So now I'm going to take this 99% IPA, and I'm going to fill it about halfway. That way it'll give me room and air in there to shake and mix, right? Okay. So I took most of the pigment out of this bottle, and I've just added 99% IPA. I should probably stir this up with the end of a clean paintbrush just to make sure I get it all. Yeah. Okay, so that's, like, look at that. Like, that's still heavy. My goodness, you know, that's why I love Tamiya. So right there, I just saved money, right? Because I'm going to be able to do the same probably at least 4 or 5 times with this one bottle, because I robbed all that pigment. So I have a reserve right there to create, you know, when I clean these bottles. Oh yeah, by the way, when you get these bottles, get a big jar, dump in a bottle of this, and soak the labels off, and soak these in IPA and reuse them. They're excellent little bottles for mixing paint with. So now that I'm confident with the viscosity of this paint that I can add more IPA, I'll just top it up to about 3/4, and this will be good to go on this model, no problem with an airbrush, okay? Okay, so before I put paint on this, I want to give it a little bit of a bath of, look at, I already knocked off the crane there. See that? These, look, you know what? I'm just taking them off. Heck with it. You know, I'm not going to try to babysit those. I'll just put them to the side and reattach them later, I guess. See, that's why I didn't put the masks on, right? Because I am clumsy. Maybe it's just because I was spoiled building big movie models that are bulletproof. You can hit them with a ball peen hammer and they don't break. Anyway, I'm just going to wipe this down with 99% IPA just to clean any finger residue, grease, oil, whatever that would cause any problems with the integrity of the base coats of paint here. This will evaporate quite quickly, especially if you have a window open and a fan on. It'll evaporate and leaves a flat, not chalky, but very clean surface. Okay, so it looks like it's nice and dry now. So now before I start, let me just say this is a fun project. Parentheses, no OCD. That's easier said than done, isn't it? You know, there's nothing more anxiety inducing when you build a model kit and you just can't wait. You know, you go over the instructions, and you just want to get on with the paint, right? And it is like airbrushing is so much fun. How far you can extend the paint, what you can do with it. So I'm going to concentrate on just putting some light sort of tacky coats on first. So this is all just a dark base coat. Give you a chance to see where you should have used filler, right? Yeah. But like I say, this is just a sort of a warm-up paint mule for me. And you know, sometimes when you go at it with an attitude like that, you end up turning out a model that you really like, you know? Like sometimes a favorite model won't even be the one that you really did do a nice build on. It might be the way the paint turned out, or just, you know, the approach that you took to it, or a specific subject, or something that you never realized. But I don't think it matters how experienced you are, you're always learning, right? You're always learning something, because every subject is different. And ships can be a real challenge to paint, like depending on how you want to go about it, because sometimes there's a lot of masking required. Mind you, if you use one of those stick-down wallpaper decks, pardon my pun, but I'm going to paint this one, but you don't really have to worry about that as much. You can just paint. If you get a little overspray, you're just putting a wood deck down anyway. But you know, with a really good airbrush, and this isn't a really good airbrush, but you'd never be able to tell if you saw any of my models. You wouldn't be able to tell me what airbrush I used, whether it was a $500 brush or a $50 one. You just wouldn't be able to tell. Because I've mentioned it before, the most important primary factor for me is the compressor. If you don't have air to push the paint through, to atomize your pigment, it doesn't matter what airbrush you have. Okay, so I just want to show you how I tape up the boot, the hull boot waterline. So there's different tapes out there, and like I really like Tamiya tape, right? Like I've always used, I mean, I use other tape too, like Mask and other painters tape, but I generally like, you know, the Tamiya because it's just reliable. Like it does what it says it does. It's just really nice tape. But most advanced modelers know that. But for those that are, you know, maybe, you know, burgeoning, you know, novice or beginning or whatever, need to know too, right? Like they want to know what's good, and to save the trouble of trying to waste the time and experience and models to wreck things to find out. But you will make mistakes though, even when you're, you know, on the cusp of your modeling adventure. But so I don't really care much for this particular Tamiya tape for thin line, for doing water lines, and I'll show you why. Like it's quite stretchy, right? So it stretches, so when it goes on, if you pull tight to do a straight line, it tends to want to pull back out of line, right? Now this is good for doing curves and stuff. That's what it's good for, but it's not the best for doing water lines. It's just a little trickier to use. You can do it, but I've been using this since my museum days, and even in film, it's automotive tape. It's thin line tape. You can get it at automotive places like Lord Co, or I'm not sure what the equivalent automotive places are in Europe or United States or UK or Australia, but it's just an automotive like pin line tape, right? That's one name for it, but you can find it if you have an idea what it is. But so it cuts a beautiful straight line, like almost the first go, you know, because you can stretch it out. Like here, I'll show you. Forgive me for my kind of robust nature with things, but okay, so, you know, when you lay it on and you just push it down, like when you drag it out like this, it just cuts a beautiful line, like right off the first go, right? And then you can just tweak it. Whereas if you do the same with this, you're going to have issues because it wants to stretch, and then when you lay it on, it wants to pull, like as you're doing it, and it just goes out of line, right? This is a more stiff, rigid tape, and it has really good adhesive too, so it'll stick well. Okay, so then I can just take a look at it and say, okay, wow, look at that, it came out. I didn't even hardly, you know, eyeball that in, and it laid on pretty good. I'll double check it, but oh, that's pretty good though. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken that same shadow color, that Panzer Gray. Remember I darkened it? So, and then I added some lighter gray to it because I want it just to be just a bit of a lighter shade. So the bottom is going to be anti-fouling gray. And I'm just going to, it's a bit lighter. We'll see if we can see it here. Yeah, you can see that it's a bit lighter. I'm not worried about the top side of this line yet because I'm going to weather the bottom of this, and then I'm going to cover it. I'm going to tape it over once it's done. I just want to get the bottom weathering done first. Okay, so I'm going to start putting some washes on this lower hull. Okay. Now, I like to wet the surface first, so you can do it with a spritzer. I like these little spritzer bottles. They actually work really well. I think a lot of hobby shops sell them, or you can get them at dollar store, I think, these things. But anyway, I'm going to start with this dark gray blue, which is 71.054 Vallejo model air. And I'm just going to lay some on, even though it's so close, but when it dries, you'll see it. So I'm just going to add some streaks, downward streaks. And once again, I'm not really worried if it seeps through this boot tape, you know, because boots don't look clean like the way, I mean, unless you're building a really ultra clean model, then you might want to clear coat that tape before you do this. But sometimes it's desirable to have a little seepage. It helps to define the line a bit more with what looks to be like salt, you know, water slapping, building up along the side of the hull like that. So this is very subtle. You can't really tell because this color is almost identical. But it will, though. It will show when it dries. You'll see it. So I'm just going to work this down, all the way down both sides, and then take a look at it, and then try another color and work from dark to light. I really don't think it matters whether you go from light to dark. It's just a personal preference. And try to use as many grays or try as many different colors as you can. But 3 or 4 should do it, going from dark to light, just to get some kind of weather in there. I mean, after all, it's only 1/700 scale, okay? Okay, so let's look at the side. So see what's happening there? See, it's very subtle, right? And isn't it interesting that blue-gray would look faded like that over panzer gray? Isn't that interesting? That's why I really like the properties of Vallejo. You notice too that now that that first wash, see, it's still there. Like even when you wet it, it's not going to go anywhere. It's staying put, right? So this next spray, when you put this wet layer on like this, water, you're creating a glaze. It's a water-based glaze, really. It's a very light, soluble glaze, but it works really well when you use diluted paint. Okay. So this, we'll see what this does. Oh, look at that. That's even more, has a more faded, has an even more faded wash effect. Yeah, I like that. We'll see what that does. We'll just work that along. Okay, so I'm going to put one more wash on this. You can see the slight fade. It's very subtle, but there's some staining there that just sort of random mottling and fade that I really like. Now I'm going to do one more application of cyanide gray, number 71.142. This is a gray also, you notice that? Okay, dark sea gray, cyanide gray. So it looks more gray, like it looks brown here, but when it's actually, when you put a wash on very thin, it actually comes across as being kind of a gray, sort of a murky kind of gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wet it down, just so that the paint will slip, slide down the side of the hull. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tuck some in here. And then I'm just going to work this down the side like this. I know it looks like, oh my goodness, what's he doing? But this will thin down quite a bit, and you won't hardly notice it, but there'll be enough here to suggest that seawater stain. I mean, the ship is being displayed out of the water, so it's almost like a dry dock display. So this will all change though. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit that with some more water, just to encourage that runoff. You can see this side, see that? So I'm going to leave that. And like I say, if it's too much, well, I'll just go over it with an airbrush and just filter it down a little bit. Okay, I want to keep it straight now so that it all runs down on both sides nice. Okay. Okay, so we've laid on some of that initial tonal change or early highlight. Okay, so we've shifted from the darker gray. We did the bottom, which was a little bit lighter than the top, remember? And then now we've masked that off and we've sort of dusted the model with a light color gray. All right, so we're going to leave it now. But what I want to talk about just for a minute or two is the sides here, because I want this weather look, and I really like what's happened here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a type of almost a salt spray kind of effect that when I sprayed the Tamiya over the Vallejo, that's why I love to use both Vallejo and Tamiya together. Like, let me just mention this too, like you should try to establish the paints that you want to go with over the long haul. Like, I don't want to discourage trying new paints, because usually paints is personal. It's a subjective thing. It's what the modeler builds their confidence in, and then they like to fine-tune it down and then stay with it and exploit every aspect of the paint they use to the fullest extent of their skill. And so I just stick with Tamiya and Vallejo because they're both water-friendly. This doesn't like IPA, isopropyl alcohol, but Tamiya loves it. But I can work that combination of medium together, and I'm very confident with it, and I can achieve results that I'm completely content with. So why would I want to change it? And even if I want to use oil base or whatever, I can do that later, but I don't always do that unless it's a initial base coat that I want to show through chipping with acrylics, where the enamel won't cut through. Even if you use isopropyl alcohol, it won't cut through enamel in special cases, but I don't normally do that. So what I'm going to do here is I can choose to clear coat this. I can use gloss, satin, or flat. It doesn't really matter in relation to what I'm going to do, because I want to put more weathering washes on this top side in the same way I did on the bottom. Now here's the decision I need to make. If I coat it with a clear coat, then the washes that I use, like these Vallejos, are not going to cling because there's no porous texture on the paint. If I clear coat it smooth, so the gravity will pull it down and it'll pool up on the bottom where this tape is. Now it'll still leave a subtle hint of a filter, but I want more of a gritty kind of texture on the side of the ship here. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to apply Vallejo washes right over top of the raw Tamiya overspray here, because there was some of this initially underneath it. You can see the line there. See that? Now, if I tried to create that, it probably wouldn't look like that. So I love that. So I want to keep that. Now, just a few points on clear coats. So I've used flat base X21 in the past. Now remember, it's a base. You don't want to put this over top of this because it'll go all chalky on you. You can deal with that, but this is better for a base, in my experience, to build on or to create effects that you're willing to take risks with, etc. Because it's got like a talcum powder in it or whatever. But anyway, that has its place for sure. Then there's this flat clear, which I like to shoot from the airbrush, which is excellent to me. I'm all out of it though. Like completely out of it. So I must have been using it on something. XF86. It's not XF21. Okay, flat base you can use with a regular brush and has a chalky effect that you wipe away, and it takes washes nice. Like, it's hard to explain, like into crevices and grit, and it's good for rust and corrosion. I really like that. Whereas this is just a clear coat over top, which I don't have anymore. So I'm going to go to, or default to, Vallejo Satin Varnish. I can use flat, gloss, or matte. I'm going to use satin because it's a good compromise. But I'm not going to put this on until I do this wash over this, and then I'll seal it just to protect it, which is what I should have done on the bottom here, but I didn't. But I mean, I risk now peeling paint away, but to me it's pretty good, but not this tape. Not general green tape. It'll pull paint off that's applied thin layers. That's one of the things you got to watch out when you use this method of very thin multiple layers, that you seal them after, that right, to protect them from tape lift. But anyway, let's continue. Okay, so just to refresh, so this is the period ship that I'm painting hood, 1931, early 1931. During this is the period section in the Bruce Taylor excellent historical book, probably one of the best on the hood history. Okay, of her whole lifespan, 1916 to 1941. The battle cruiser HMS Hood. And so this is the period that I'm modeling with this 1/700 scale trumpeter kit. You can see the weathering. Like, look at the hull. Like, look at the different, like, see there? It looked like they were painting a section that left that out there. Look at all this staining on the front, near the front forecastle, right? And near the bow and so on. Like, it's incredible, eh? Like, a lot of weathering on the side. So this was after she sat for a couple of years, just before the mutiny, which is another interesting read. Later in 31, there was a mutiny on the hood. And then here, just in closing on this, you can see the seaplane on the back, see? Look how it's cocked up on an angle like that. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, and then I'll show you one more photo. This, mind you, was in July 1940. Notice like they're having swimming races outside here. Cool, eh? Look at the salt spray on the front, like along just above the waterline. Look at that, right? So ships that had a fairly long lifespan went through all manner of color variations and weathering. So, you know, whatever you do, if it's close to the period photographs that you're using, then it should be appropriate, all right? So the whole point of this style of wet on wet, or my slang term for it is called flood painting, where you actually paint the surface with water first. This has all been airbrushed, but not this part. This has been flood painted. So you build up a series of colors that are going to represent the finished color. 2 or 3 I like to use. And you can see here that as I'm flooding the water, keeping the surface wet, I have a bit of a wetting agent. Some use detergents. So you can buy those kinds of things. That's personal choice. A little bit of dish soap works too, but not too much though. But see how like it'll capillary, the water capillary is along this edge here on the upper deck. See that? So it's already, so if you magnified or looked at it under a microscope, this deck would be flooded with water up to the edge of this, the gunwale. And so now that it's wet, I can take the straight pigment and then just drop it in and let the water carry it, and the capillary action cuts the paint in to the vertical surfaces for you. Yes, it leaves a little bit of a lighter pin wash than you would desire, but that all changes though when you put the final dark pin wash at the end. Will mute all that and create a shadow. It'll turn that light little corner, in this case IDF sand gray, 71.141 that I'm using. And you have a little bit of water on hand, a little bit of pigment, and you just flood it in. Don't worry if it creeps up a little bit, because it'll settle back down and it's thin. And my final wash, or tint in this case, will be like the pin wash that goes into the engraving to kick out the planks in this case, which should be whatever you choose, a red brown, a dark brown. See how you can just move around and be a little bit sloppy even, and as long as you have a wet surface, and which is rendering the paint thin in this case, like a filter, you get a nice clean line with a traditional brush. And it's actually quite relaxing to paint this way. I think sometimes we can become rather airbrush centric, and we want to airbrush everything, and that's okay. So you can see this spot right here. That was a glue spot there, and I tried to re-engrave it. But that was a mistake I made. But because this is a out-of-the-box build kind of paint mule, that's my psychology and my approach to it. I'm okay with that. See how that paint just creeps along the water of the flood, and it just tucks up nice against the vertical corner of the superstructure. Okay, so I just want to point this out quick. So what I've done here is now I'm at the oil dry brushing stage, sort of highlighting some of the gray, the battleship gray, sort of a blue gray in this case, which at this point, the hood in 1931 was very grimy looking, and then it was started to get painted after the mutiny. Okay, so you can see the turrets, so that's kind of the color I'm after. I just find it suitable for this particular period that I'm modeling. And you can see here that when you use oils over acrylics, it's a marriage made in heaven. So you can highlight and have control. Like I just take a cheap brush and I cut them off flush, because you're going to wear the brush out before it's time. It's just the nature of dry brushing when you do it the traditional way. So you can see I have a piece of hardboard. It sucks the oil out of the pigment, and it just leaves the oil pigment, so it's sort of greasy. Well, not super greasy, but almost dry, kind of soft texture to it. And then I just come in and I just start working in. I make sure that the brush, most of the paint's off the brush, and then it'll go a long ways, and I just start rubbing it lightly and a little bit more aggressively, and you get a feel for it, and you start to highlight like the, you know, the rivets and things like that. Like here's an example on the bottom that's black. What dry brushing will do. So you can see how it starts to catch the edges there. And then you can just rub it lightly and change the color with a kind of a faded sort of texture to it, right? See? And you can just keep making that more opaque or transparent depending how much you rub it in. And it just has a nice effect, especially for smaller scale and larger as well. And then that way, it just helps, especially smaller models, pop a bit more, you know, because they're so small to begin with. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. And the colors that I've used here is, this is lamp black, Prussian blue, and I like to use Prussian blue. It has a darker kind of blue. It's a really nice color, Prussian blue, because you don't want to make this too blue, the gray. So I take some white and I just pull in just a tiny amount of Prussian blue, like just like this, like hard, like about, like that's even too much, and it'll knock that down into a blue. And then if you want to render it gray, pull some black in, and then pull white in, and you can adjust your gray color. And then as I get more to the end, I'll just pull in some white just to highlight some of the higher points or the upper surfaces on the model, okay? Okay, I'll just touch on this quick. So this is just a wash, an oil wash with odorless mineral spirits and really good quality Winsor Newton raw umber. Okay, I showed you that before, I think. Okay, and now you can use, to me, a panel line or acrylic washes, whatever. There's a lot of ways to do this. I like to use oils because it's transparent. It has a very strong pigment. I like to create my own wash, or some call it taco sauce, whatever, because I can control the strength of it. Like I can come on here like this, and I can just put mineral spirits just flood the top of the deck like this. I don't want it to run down the sides of the ship. At least not yet, I don't, if I'm done with, you know, weathering the sides. Okay, so now it's all wet. So now I can come in and grab a little bit and just touch it in like this, see? I can put it in a little bit stronger where the anchor chain house holes are. So you can see there's, like, see the planks? It's beautiful engraving on this kit, you know, like all the Trumpeter kits. I mean, this is 1/700 scale. You can see that, you know, you can paint a decent deck if you don't want to go the printed deck route, you know, which is fine. They look pretty awesome too. But, you know, in this case, it's just an out-of-the-box build, right? See, I can control the strength of the pigment, which I kind of like. Just gives me a feeling of greater control. And it's very much the same way you would flood the area with acrylics as well, except oils don't leave unsightly tide marks. And if you want a Q-tip and clean up after for a while, you can do that. If you use acrylic on this and try to do that, you'll probably cut through if you use isopropyl alcohol. So, because they're acrylic paints. So that's one of the reasons why I like to use oils over acrylics, because oils and the solvent that you use generally won't touch the acrylic. Okay. And this wash will clean up any of the corners and edges that might have some overspray or whatever. It just sort of mutes them and blends them in. Okay. Ships, eh? They're never done till they're done. Anyway, I'm still, you know, going away on this thing. I just want to point out, you know, okay, so this is an impressionist, you know, model, right? This small scale. But what I like to do near the end, just having fun still here, is take a very light gray. It doesn't really matter as long as it's a lighter gray than the overall gray on the ship, right? See that? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of it. I'm just going to wet the brush and then wipe it off, and then just so that the bristles are wet. And then I'm just going to come in and I'm just going to touch like edges, you know, like this. Okay. And I'm just going to highlight, like even the tops of the barrels, you know, I mean, it's so small anyway, but it just makes the small scale pop much better. I'll probably even put a light wash on these blast bags just to tone them down. But you can see how I did a little bit of that highlight work on the front of the forecastle deck here. And then let's see, is there some back here? Like even these little bollards, right? You can touch the tops of those, even with white. I like to stay away from white, but very light gray. Just touch the tops of them. It just helps those little details to pop a bit better. I'll have to work this crane over a bit too, but you get the idea. Okay. So I just wanted to point this out so I don't forget. So if you're going to put decals on this, I just use gloss varnish or satin varnish by Vallejo. And I just apply it with a brush. So the water level markings are here. Waterline marking decal goes here on the bow and the stern. So I just paint in by hand just so that decal can sit down smooth, and you're basically eliminating the grainy texture of the flat paint to avoid, you know, silvering, decal silvering, right? And then you can just do the same when the decal's dry and set. You just hand paint it with matte varnish and it'll all disappear, the glossy. See on the front there? There. And also there.